Hi, I'm Rahil, the host of Daybreak. I have some good news and also a little bit of bad news. Let me get the bad news out of the way first. Because it is Diwali, we won't have our usual Daybreak Unwind segment at the end of our Thursday episode this week. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Unwind, it's a special segment where my co host Snigdha and I come together to share some of our recommendations books, movies, music, the works. Now, the fun part is that you, our listeners, also send in your recommendations, and we really look forward to it. But don't worry, we will be back with our and, of course, your recommendations next Thursday. So keep them coming. In fact, that brings me to the good news. If you haven't sent us your recommendations yet, you now have some more time to do it. The theme this week is fiction in translation. We want to know your favorite novel translated from any language. You can send us your recommendations on WhatsApp. Our number is 89711 It'll also be in the show notes of this episode. And now, on to the episode. For a whole decade, Ola and Uber dominated the cab-hailing market. But cut to 2024 and things look different. You see, that scenario is now shifting. And that's because these two companies have been drifting for a while now. But that's created room for a third contender, Rapido, which has been making the most of this moment. You see, both homegrown Ola and US-based Uber have been dealing with a very unique set of problems. The whole ride-hailing business seems to have taken a backseat for Ola, which of course now is knee-deep in the electric vehicles business. And meanwhile, for Uber, the biggest problem has been stagnation. Now, those factors have taken a toll on their combined market share, which has come down to around 60 to 70% from over 90% just 3 years ago. But there's a huge opportunity here, and 9-year-old Rapido is making the most of it. Despite having merely 10 months of experience in cab hailing, it's already clear that Ola and Uber cannot take this new competition lightly, especially now. I mean, the growing customer dissatisfaction with both Ola and Uber is a very well-known fact by now. It also doesn't help that taking a cab has just become a lot more expensive in the last year and a half or so. Fares have gone up by a whole 30 to 40%, and then to make matters worse, cancellations and wait times have also been going up considerably. Basically, hailing a cab just isn't much fun for anyone involved, including the drivers, the main service providers in the ecosystem. People in the space say that drivers have been particularly unhappy with their earnings of late. And Uber and Ola obviously have a big role to play here. A fleet operations executive said that they've both been cutting drivers' incentives, and at the same time, they've doubled the commission on each trip to 25 to 30% of the fare. Now, of course, drivers are frustrated, which is why we've seen a lot more strikes and posters from cab drivers' unions of late. But Rapido has come in and is targeting these very frustrated drivers. It's actually taking a page out of the auto-hailing platform Nammayatri's playbook by borrowing from its subscription-based model. And drivers are finding that system far more favorable. It seems to be working. And that means just one thing. Now that their dominance is starting to slip, Uber and Ola can't afford to ignore Rapido's ambition. Welcome to Daybreak, a business podcast from the Ken. I'm your host Rahil Philippos, and I'll be joining my colleague Snigdha Sharma every day of the week to bring you one business story that is worth understanding and worth your time. Today is Wednesday, the 30th of October. After being a bike-hailing app, Rapido's decision to enter the cab-hailing space does make sense. Like I mentioned before, there's been a great deal of discontent among users of Ola and Uber. In fact, a recent survey of 3,500 users found that over 8 out of 10 Uber customers and 9 in 10 who use Ola face issues while using these apps. Now, Rapido is making the most of that discontent. In fact, it looks like it wants to become the next Ola. You see, Ola is no longer Uber's biggest competitor. Its ride volumes are down to 2/3 of what they were 5 years ago. And of course, it isn't extinct yet, but the level of competition has considerably declined. Plus, it has shifted its focus to EV manufacturing and reining its AI technology. For the longest time, Ola was the go-to choice for budget-conscious users, but now even that seems to be changing. You see, given Rapido's origins in the bike taxi space, more price-sensitive customers are naturally getting inclined towards it. So, what's happening is that a lot of Ola users are now migrating to Rapido. Uber, of course, still has an advantage here because it claims a slightly more premium user base. But the real challenge it's facing has been retaining drivers. You see, when it comes to fleet, Rapido is becoming an incredibly popular option among drivers, most of whom so far have used Uber. This is just one of the many reasons entering the cab hailing business makes complete sense for Rapido. But first and foremost, it means higher ticket size and better margins for the company. People in the space explain that cab rides cost around 150 to 200 rupees on average, while bike rides cost a third of that. So obviously that means more money for Rapido. Plus, there's also a lot more scope. Like for instance, during bad weather, most people opt for a cab rather than a bike. And of course, there's the fact that it can also accommodate way more people. The cab segment unlocks a whole bunch of other lucrative opportunities as well, like airport and intercity rides. As these tend to be over a longer distance, it brings down the driver's fuel costs and dead mileage. So it makes sense that Rapido started cab hailing. But now that it's in the big leagues, it needs to break the decade-old monopoly of Ola and Uber. And it's doing that by following some very well-worn playbooks. More on that in the next segment. Back in 2022, Bangalore-based Namayatri introduced a one-of-its-kind subscription model for auto drivers using the platform. Now, unlike Ola and Uber, Rapido has adopted this model too. So now it charges its drivers a fixed subscription fee for allowing them to access the platform. Initially, Rapido adopted the model for its auto services late last year. But then it eventually became the first to do so among cab aggregators as well. The fee here varies based on the subscription period, say daily, weekly, or monthly. Everything else, the remaining earnings, the driver gets to keep. Now that is enough of an incentive for those frustrated with other aggregators to join Rapido. For context, a driver can earn 10 to 15% more on the commission-free platform compared to the same trip booked on Ola or Uber. What's more, the company doesn't deduct a 5% tax on each fare, as is the rule for cab service providers. It claims that under its subscription model, it is simply providing its software as a service tech to drivers and doesn't directly earn revenue from ride fares. Now, the upside of this, of course, is that it is a way better deal for drivers. But the downside is that there is some legal ambiguity here. Rapido has also pulled another lever, streamlining driver onboarding. An executive from a fleet operator explained how exactly this works. You see, with Uber, drivers need to go to the office. There's a background verification that usually takes a few days. They check your criminal record, things like that. Meanwhile, on Rapido, drivers can onboard even remotely. The Ken spoke to an investor who said acquiring supply is a strategy that has worked well for Rapido so far. It has been able to keep its customer acquisition costs in control. While the overlap between bike taxi and cab users may be smaller, Rapido has a distinct advantage. They added that by tapping into the auto user base, it can more easily attract customers to its cab service. One founder said Rapido has also approached fleet operators to partner with them. Say if it collects 10% of a driver's earnings, it has proposed sharing half of that with the fleet operator, given that they meet certain milestones in terms of number of trips or drivers being available for a certain number of hours. Indeed, a sweet deal for the operators and the drivers, but that also means Rapido is trading a considerable portion of its revenue for easier access to the market. Now, that may not be sustainable in the long term. Stay tuned. Dual apping is at an all-time high now. Back in the day, sure, Ola would have been the choice for drivers who did use multiple apps, but the probability of dual apping itself would have been considerably lower. Now that Rapido is in the picture, that has really changed. One ride-hailing executive said in cities like Hyderabad, 60 to 70% of Uber drivers who are dual apping will be using Rapido. Even in terms of popularity, Rapido's cabs business has already gained steam in cities like Bangalore and Hyderabad, where it has in fact outpaced Ola. The company is now also picking up traction in Mumbai and Delhi. So now Uber is pushing its fleet partners to monitor and penalize dual lapping. It's realized that it could lose big time. For drivers to get a decent take home, they need to be online for a certain number of hours and take 50 to 60 trips weekly. So if anyone has a considerably lower number of trips, the target is immediately on their back. Uber's fleet partners scrutinize cases where a driver might have taken only, say, 20 trips on the app, given that they wouldn't suffice to cover fuel and maintenance costs. Another giveaway is when the distance logged on the platform is lower than the actual mileage on the vehicle. Now, in the middle of all of this, cab aggregators are realizing it's better to be safe than sorry. And they are doing that by going the no commission way. Uber and Ola are also going down the same path as Rapido and Namayatri by introducing subscription plans for autos in some markets. So it's quite clear that they are feeling the heat. It also doesn't help that Rapido isn't alone. Over the years, upstarts like BlueSmart and Chauffeur have also popped up. They've recognized Uber and Ola's moment of weakness and are being innovative with their strategies. But the thing is, sure, the Ola-Uber duopoly may be waning and things may be looking up for companies like Rapido. But reaching the same scale will be far from easy. This is only the beginning of a grueling trek.
Daybreak is produced from the newsroom of The Ken, India's first subscriber-focused business news platform. What you're listening to is just a small sample of our subscriber-only offerings. A full subscription unlocks daily long-form feature stories, newsletters, and podcast extras. Head to theken.com and click on the red subscribe button on the top of the website. Today's episode was hosted by Rahil Philippos and edited by Rajiv CN.